Welcome everyone to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker. Thank you so much for joining us on this midweek edition of Flyover Footy that will preview the SKC St. Louis match on Wednesday night, the Darbecue that is midweek. We'll finish the matchup in 2025 between St. Louis and SKC. Let's dive right into it with a look at what happened between these two teams the last time they faced. It was a match to forget, honestly. 2-0 loss by St. Louis with a brace from Dejan Joveljic. And for reference on the City side, because that roster and lineup isn't going to be too dissimilar, though we should expect some firepower to come back from what we will expect to see on Wednesday. We had Ben Lunt in net, as that was one of the earlier games that Roman Berkey had gone out. Joachim Nilsson, Henry Kessler, and Josh Yaro were our back three. Kyle Hebert was our left wing back. Alfredo Morales, Marcel Hartl were our central midfielders, and Akil Watts was our right wing back. Celio Pompeu, Conrad Wallem were the dual 10s, and Klaus was our striker. We can expect a few changes, I think, and we'll get into that later on. But let's dive right into what Sporting KC has looked like and what they will carry into this match. They, like us, tied for 12th in the West. SKC has a 3-8-1 record with 10 points, 17 goals scored, 22 goals against, and a -5 goal differential. They are 1-5-0 away. That's 1 win and 5 losses on the road so far this season. In the last 3 matches, they have a 1-0 loss away to Portland last week, a 1-0 win at home against the LA Galaxy, which we'll get to the intricacies and record-settingness in a moment. And then before that, a 2-1 loss away to FC Cincinnati. Some trends that we've noticed from SKC over the past few games. After starting the year winless in their first 6, they defeated us, and then they've been win-loss every other game in their last 6. Starting with us, win, and then so last week, they had a loss. They're looking to continue that kind of streak of back and forth. Notable, as I alluded to, in their win against the LA Galaxy a couple weeks ago, 1-0 at home, they were the first team in MLS history to win a game with 0 shots taken. Not even 0 shots on net, just 0 shots taken and recorded. First MLS team to do this. It was an own goal from the Galaxy that gave them the win in that game. Sporting KC has also had a lengthy travel schedule this past week. They played Portland really late on Saturday night, and then they had to fly back. Juxtapose that against St. Louis, and you have to give St. Louis the advantage, having a couple home matches here recently with the midweek U.S. Open Cup match last week, and then at home, obviously, against San Diego. The counterpoint to that is the fixture congestion that SKC has not had to deal with, whereas St. Louis has. On the health and player availability front for SKC, Logan Ndembe will be out again with an adductor groin issue. He's expected to be out until June. Joaquin Fernandez has a hamstring injury, likely out for another week or two. That's what SKC has dealing. They don't have a whole lot of injuries, not unlike San Diego from last week. The biggest storyline, though, for SKC coming into this is just how the team has played undoubtedly better under interim coach Kerry Zavanyan. This is the new coach bounce that they were hoping to see, though not as extravagant as a multi-match win streak. That 9 points in their last 5 games is noteworthy, or in their last 6 games, rather, is noteworthy. He has earned the new coach bounce against St. Louis, and it's gone 3-3 since then. 9 of their 10 points overall this season have come in that last 6-game stretch where Zavanyan has taken over the team. Their leading goal scorers this season are Dejan Joveljic. He had a brace against us in the first go-round, and he's had 5 on the season. Daniel Shallowy, a name that we know all too well, out on the wing for SKC, has 4 goals as well. These 2 players equal the amount of goals that all of City has so far this season with 9. So as bad as SKC has been, their ability to score goals, and in particular, these 2 players really adds that undesirable dimension to how you juxtapose that viewing St. Louis's struggles so far this season. Now, looking at the St. Louis City side that we'll see on Wednesday, like I said, tied with SKC for 12th place coming into this match. For the City record, 2 wins, 6 losses, 4 draws on that 10 points with 9 goals scored, 14 goals against, and the same -5 goal differential, though it's easy to see a difference in 17 goals scored versus 9 goals scored between these 2 teams. St. Louis is 1-3-2, both home and away. So they're also looking to recreate or kickstart Energizer Park as a fortress for 2025 because it hasn't been that way so far this season. The last few matches, well, it was looking to build off of the U.S. Open Cup, and we didn't see that. The loss against San Diego last weekend, 2-1. We had the U.S. Open Cup win before that against Union Omaha, 2-0. And then the loss against Seattle, everybody remembers 4-0, and everybody wants to forget 4-1 rather against Seattle. a couple weeks ago. Some trends for this St. Louis City side. We have not won a league match since Seattle on March 15th. We are approaching 2 months since our last league match win. We have 8 straight with 2 draws mixed into that. Over the course of the season, 5 of our 12 matches have been clean sheets, but 6 matches we've gone scoreless. The last goal in the run of play for St. Louis, and brace yourself for this one, the 52-minute mark of LAFC when Cedric Toyshirt scored a goal from a Giannis Horn pass. That was back on April 27th, 4 matches ago. More to come on in a bit on just how much St. Louis's goal scoring have been struggling in relation to their chance creation and tactics to that. But that's a mark that I think we're not wanting to count up the minutes is the point. And when you look to a 52-minute mark 4 games ago, this is another one of those bad things that you're just having to tack on to everything else that's going on. For St. Louis against SKC, the biggest storyline, I think, and one that we haven't really talked about much on social media between matches thus far, and it may or may not play a difference, is that Olaf Melberg is actually suspended from this match, having accumulated 3 yellow cards so far this season, with the last 2 coming in the most recent 2 matches. Those 3 yellow cards were against Seattle in both games, the 1-0 win and the 4-1 loss, and then most recently against San Diego. Azrudin Valentic will be leading the team, as Valley, as they call him. Valley is Olaf Melberg's longtime assistant coach that he brought to City with him. So easy to see, do not expect any changes compared to what Olaf employs. In fact, on Tuesday's press conference, Olaf Melberg jokingly told a story about Brahmanovic, their old club in Sweden. Melberg was actually suspended when they won the league-winning match in that, I think in the second division. But when they won that match that clinched their league title, it was with Olaf Melberg suspended and Valley at the helm of that team. Again, don't expect too many tactics to change because this is a long-time assistant that comes right alongside Olaf in supporting the system and style that are being run out. So it'll be interesting to see if we do see any changes, though. Now, as far as what changes we know we can see, player availability continues to trend positive. There's some hiccups, yes, but overall, Roman Berkey is the story. Roman Berkey is now fully available, and if you take Marcel Hartl's words at face value, it sounds like he's ready to hand off the captain's armband back to Roman Berkey for this game. Berkey returning to training at the end of last week, getting a few matches in. He looked just fine when I saw him in training on Tuesday. Roman Berkey is back and ready to go by all accounts. Other players of note that were not at training on Tuesday were Thomas Totland, Alfredo Morales, Chris Durkin, and Edu Leuven. Totland continues to nurse his hamstring back to health. You're seeing pictures and video on social media with him getting stronger and better after that setback a couple weeks ago. Alfredo Morales now has an adductor injury to deal with. Chris Durkin had his MCL and actually trained on Monday. Chris Durkin returned to training on Monday, but Olaf said, quote, he picked up a knock on Monday. And I know that's not what anyone wants to hear. And we don't know the severity of what that is. But Durkin was not at training that we saw in the early portion of training anyway. We only got to see the first 15 minutes or so of training on Tuesday. So he came back on Monday, wasn't there with the team on Tuesday. His status is questionable. But we do have good news. We have Henry Kessler, we have Rasmus Alm, we have JGR, we have all of those other players that are kind of returning to health. And Kessler in particular was training with the team on Tuesday. And so a lot of expectations for Henry Kessler, as well as Joachim Nilsson. Joachim Nilsson trained on Monday and Tuesday alongside Henry Kessler in their returns. So while Rasmus Alm, I think, is still a little bit ways away because Olaf mentioned specifically he's under a different kind of protocol in his return to play with the extent of his injury. Henry Kessler may be available on the roster, may start. Who knows what status he is, but he was looking just fine on Tuesday and he trained on Monday. Joachim Nilsson, same. He's wearing kind of a leg sleeve going on, but no brace. Looked like he didn't have any designations or tags going on. So that will be kind of exciting to see for Joachim Nilsson and Henry Kessler's availabilities against SKC on Wednesday. Let's look at a few strengths, weaknesses, and styles of play from these two teams. We know the St. Louis weaknesses, finishing off scoring chances. We've had an issue lately of avoiding the offside call. Keeping possession of the ball has been a consistent struggle, though we started to see a little bit of a better look against San Diego. So we hope to keep that trend going, essentially, for higher pressing, possessing the ball a little bit more, and that enabling chances to be created. We attack through the middle. We still like our long balls. We will attempt multiple crosses, just the nature of the wing play game, using those wing backs. We take a lot of shots, but we're struggling getting the quality consistently, but also we know the struggles in finishing. And we like to play in our own half, which we hope to see building off of from the San Diego game and getting better. High pressing, turning the ball over in our attacking half obviously plays into that. On the Sporting KC side, Sporting KC finishes their scoring chances more often than not. They like to shoot from direct free kicks. They attack down the wings. That's a big component of their style. Is while they might utilize a different formation, 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 look, they do like to play down the wings. They stretch out their fullbacks wide. They stretch out their attacking midfielders, their attacking forwards, really wide areas. Daniel Shallowy loves to play in the wide areas. Sporting KC likes to steal the ball from their opposition. So they're a pretty good pressing team. They've shown a propensity to be a higher pressing team, which we saw in our first matchup against them, but also a pressing team more often. They protect the leads when they get them, or they don't protect team leads when they get them very often, because they've had these back and forth matches where they'll start conceding. They might score a goal in the later parts of the first half, but they'll concede. And so they don't hold leads well. That bodes well when they come to Energizer Park. They're not a good team at winning aerial duels. They don't defend counterattacks very well, and they don't defend set pieces well. So for a St. Louis team that has struggled in scoring goals in the run of play, there is an opportunity here to develop better counterattacks that can draw fouls, that can earn set pieces. Now, obviously, you're missing Eddie Leuven. He will be unavailable for this match on Wednesday, but you have the quality from Marcel Hartl in some of these set piece opportunities. Klaus is good at winning duels. Betcher is good at winning duels. There's opportunities here to take advantage of some deficiencies that this SKC side has. Sporting KC also likes to play down the left. When they use these wide angles, they will progress the ball more often than not down their left side. So our right defensive manner, our right wing back, whoever that is, our right center back, and our right midfielders, that's going to be a key focus of this game, is how our right side can handle their left. And both teams have a consistent 11. So there's chemistry that's been building over these past few games. Olaf, for better or for worse, has used somewhat of the same lineup the past few MLS league matches, but we'll see if the return of a few key players plays into that capability for Olaf to continue to improve the quality of his squad. Now, for Sporting KC, there's a few stats and a few factors that I think are really interesting to know about this club. First, SKC is first in MLS in progressive carries. They are very willing to dribble the ball forward into space as part of their build. So this means for St. Louis, closing that space, not allowing their players to have a lot of movement on the ball, pressing. That's a huge key for St. Louis, preventing them from taking the space. Very important, as well as following up those trigger points. Last week against San Diego, I think we saw, maybe for the first time, a really cohesive St. Louis high press in off the ball movement, following up where Klaus or Toyshirt were initiating a press, and even Hartl at times when he was pressing up even higher. So for St. Louis to be mindful on the defensive side, not allowing SKC to take space, and they're not just first in MLS in progressive carries, they're also sixth in progressive passes. So they play the ball out of the back, but they're really good at keeping possession of the ball, moving it higher up the field. That's where this battle between the success of St. Louis's high press or a press of any kind, even in the mid block, really goes against SKC's success so far in progressing the ball in a high volume number of times. They're only doing this, though, as the 17th highest team in average possession. So this isn't a scenario where you're going up against a Seattle or an LA Galaxy, San Diego type team where they want to possess the ball upwards of 60% of the time. SKC only possesses at an average of 50.3%. So they're kind of up and down in these matches, depending on the opposition, of how much they actually possess. So watching whether or not they're willing to let St. Louis possess the ball and play through them is going to be just as much an interesting battle as the success of St. Louis's defensive side against an SKC team that is so good at progression. Expected goals are a really interesting dynamic here. And there's been a lot of talk this week on expected goals in finishing, goals scored versus expected goals. So some stats breakdown that I have that I think informs the way that these teams have found success really focuses on XG. SKC is actually worse than St. Louis in expected goals. 11.7 to St. Louis's 14.6 so far this season. And if you remember the actual goals scored, that plays into this. Actual goals scored for KC are 17 versus 9 for St. Louis. So SKC, a team that is expected to score 11.7 but has scored 17. St. Louis is expected to score 14.6 and has only scored 9. The non-penalty expected goals is pretty similar. SKC at 9.4, STL at 13.8. So St. Louis is expected, based on the types of shots, the location on the field, the angle of the player, all of that, the stats are saying we should be scoring more goals than them, but there's a massive actual goal differential in what Sporting KC has been able to score versus what St. Louis City has been able to score. And so that plays into this non-penalty goal minus non-penalty expected goals. This is that difference. There is a stat that is tracked that looks at how efficient teams are in finishing versus what the stats say they should be finishing. And Sporting KC is actually the third highest in MLS in not just finishing, but overperforming their expected goals. Plus 3.6 goals scored compared to what the stats say they should be scoring. St. Louis, on the other side, the eye test really matches the stats on this one. St. Louis is second to last in MLS still with negative 6.8 non-penalty goals minus non-penalty expected goals. This means that we have scored 6.8 less goals than the stats say we should have. And if you're only scoring 9 goals so far, that would put you at 15, 16 goals. Based on our game so far, the number of points that could correlate to is probably an astronomical number that a lot of us don't want to consider right now. So that plays into this whole conversation that I've been having in social media of XG, of finishing, of saying our players may be underperforming. But there's a lot more that goes into that. And this is not an easy conversation for St. Louis. This is not an easy straight line answer of the players aren't finishing when they're being put in a good position to finish. There are a lot of intangibles that go along with finishing. And I feel like this is a good opportunity to expand upon some of that conversation where 140 plus characters on social media might not be enough. Some of those intangibles of finishing is just straight up confidence. And we have to take a good hard look at this season as a whole and what's been happening in the confidence of our players. And this isn't just a striker's confidence that we've talked about in the past few years of Klaus or Nico Gioacchini, Sam Adenor and Cedric Toyshirt, all those players who are strikers and their job is to finish. This is a confidence in playing kind of a thing where earlier in the season, you have a head coach who has been very clear at times to the media and to the fans that he doesn't feel we have the quality of players to run the system that he wants to run. And this was jarring. This caught a lot of people off guard, and it continues to permeate. So we remember it as media fans, as people who love this team and watch these players. Imagine what the players feel about this. Does that play into any kind of drama behind the scenes? I don't know. We've heard from the players that the locker room is still strong. That's one thing that's been a good thing to hear is versus last season after Carnell left or as Carnell was leaving, you had players like Chris Durkin say that the locker room was fractured. We don't seem to have that issue, but you can't help but wonder if there's a confidence issue going on with your manager at times earlier in the season, especially at the beginning of this streak of losses and winless streak, calling out the quality of players. And it could be used as a motivating factor, sure, but the players clearly haven't responded to it as a motivating factor. And along with the confidence, along with those intangibles, you do have to look at the positioning. It's not to say the stat that I threw out earlier that we're underperforming our expected goals. We're still in the bottom third of overall expected goals compared to MLS teams. So we're not setting the world on fire in how many goals we're expected to score. We're just doing a really poor job of even finishing that amount. And so you do look at the positioning. You do look at the formations. Are we running our best 11 out there versus just staying with a system that Olaf finds comfortable or thinks that he wants to run because in an ideal scenario, a back three with wing backs in his mind will perform the best. If you don't have the quality of players that matches up with that formation, you're going to struggle. And I do think that plays into what's going on. You have at times this season, Cedric Toyshirt telling us he plays best as an underneath 9.5 type player. So that second striker underneath Klaus. You have Marcel Hartl, who we know played really well last year as a wide attacker on that left side. It's unquestionable that he played well, and it's unquestionable that he plays well when he's put in the attacking end. So the you get into kind of backseat coaching a little bit, because the game plan so far has clearly been you bring Marcel Hartle back deeper with Edu Leuven out because you need that quality in the midfield, but it hasn't led to an increase in goal scoring by having that quality in the midfield help progress the ball to the attackers. So at some point throughout the season, and maybe this goes into what Olaf had mentioned earlier in his comments to me, but at some point in the season, I think you really have to look at the tactics change, the formation changes to align with your best 11. It's questionable how, honestly, it's questionable what kind of a leash Olaf will have at this point, having lost 8 straight and going into a really dangerous May stretch where you need to start winning, or the playoffs will fall further and further out of possibility. And so will he be more willing to change the formation, or is he really waiting for some of those players to come back, like a Henry Kessler and Joachim Nilsson, to say, all right, we don't need to play Josh Arrow as much, we don't need to play Kyle Hebert as much, we can put in the better players, Horn, Baumgartel, Hebert, Kessler, those kinds of things, as opposed to changing the actual formation, as opposed to going to 4 in the back consistently, utilizing Conrad Wallem in a more midfield attacking role without relying on him as a winger. There's a lot of these discussions that it feels like time is running out for this season. As we sit here in the middle of May, these seem like a really urgent question to be asking, that things have really escalated too quickly, it seems. These are some of the things that I look for St. Louis that don't really play into the stats story, but it is a few narratives that I think are important to keep in mind as we just wait for these players to perform better for a head coach that was brought in to continue a system, and he has clearly changed things up a little more drastically than, who knows, maybe even the organization expected. But looking at some of the questions for this particular game against SKC, I ask some of these questions. I ask, how will City perform without Olaf at the helm? Mentioned earlier that Vali is a longtime assistant coach to Olaf. So will Vali continue everything? Will there be some kind of mechanism to get feedback from Olaf in the game? How will the tactics change in the second half, if any, with Vali at the helm? What is it going to take to put balls in the net? Different formation, different style being run. Can Olaf's system get better out of the players who showed so much at the end of last season? Because like I posed on social media, either you believe that the players we have on this team, like Marcel Hartle, Cedric Toyshirt, Giannis Horn, Simon Betcher, Klaus, Conrad Wallem, either you believe that when those of them that were with City at the end of last season, if you believe that last season was an aberration, the last 10 games of the season was a fluke, and these are not quality players, or you believe that something is wrong with what they're being asked to do this season, where they're put on the field, the tactics, structure, and system that the new head coach this season has employed. There have been multiple times talking to Seti, talking to Cello, that when asked what's changed, what's different this season in your play because you were scoring goals last season, the answer invariably from all of them included, it's a new coach, it's a new system. And I don't think this new coach was brought in to implement a new system. So can we get more out of these players with the existing head coach, and what's it going to take to get them to finish? And the third question, will the return of some key players be what it takes to add quality and depth back to this club for the late game boost? And just in general, if the system doesn't change, if the formations don't change. So by extension of that, will Olaf make adjustments beyond taking players out due to being tired? Something that he seemed strong at earlier in the season, but lately, especially in the San Diego game, it wasn't there. That was questionable on his subs because the first subs made 72 minutes in the game, 3 subs because they were tired, not because he needed to change tactics or wanted to see anything different. So with those returning quality players, with a Kessler, a Nilsson, with Ostrak getting better each week, you look to say, how can that shore up different phases of the game? What will that enable for some other players? Taking out Josh Yarrow, potentially taking out Kyle Hebert and replacing them with better quality players who were very much obviously meant to be the starters. And will those players get the opportunity? Olaf has also seemed a a little slow to the trigger in bringing players back, which is good in the sense of you don't want to rush players like Joachim Nilsson or Henry Kessler from a grade 2 hamstring strain. You don't want to bring those players back too quick, but at the same time, there's a balance here of winning, doing what the players are able to do on the field, and honestly not relying on Josh Yarrow and Kyle Hebert. Because I know Matt Doyle put out there, you run with Kyle Hebert and Josh Yarrow regularly, then what do you expect type of thing. St. Louis City SC was never designed to run out there regularly with Josh Yarrow and Kyle Hebert in their everyday starting 11. Of that, I am sure. This roster was built around those players being depth pieces, being rotational players. It was never constructed, and we talked about this dating back to last season, maybe even the season before, depending on health and availability. On an ideal scenario, those two players were never meant to be starting 11 caliber players. And it goes to beyond just those two. You're looking at players who have seen significant time like Akil Watts. But, you know, there's this return from injury that I think we're looking forward to because of some of those factors. And it really does start on our back line. There is a cascade effect that will happen, I think, in better quality backline players, because that's how Olaf is wanting us to build, that can get the ball into better positions for our attackers. With each passing winless game, and this is my final question, and this may be tricky because Olaf's not managing this game. With each passing winless game, and as the playoffs already start to look further out of reach for just 1/3 of the way through the season, which is ridiculous, uh, barring an SKC like turnaround from a year ago or so, in which this team seems like the playoffs are now out of reach, uh, is this a make or break game for Olaf? That question has been asked a few times so far, and it's starting to extend up to Lutz in the sense of putting together a roster that Olaf has to work with. I'm a little more willing to overlook the player availability issues in the sense of injuries. I'm not. I don't like to use injuries as an excuse, but you got to be realistic. You have to be real with the players we have available. I refuse to believe that Josh Yarrow, Kyle Heberts, and Akil Watts are ever going to be part of your ideal 11, no matter who the head coach is. And so if they are, which is hard to argue given who our bench players are in the past few games, that's where I give a little grace. That's where I give a little understanding of you got to give players time to come back and see what you have to work with. I did the same thing for Bradley Carnell last season. I did not like how quick to the trigger the organization was to get rid of Bradley Carnell because we knew how much talent he was getting in the summer window. It was basically a condemnation to his system and style and tactics and how he managed the locker room, more so than whether he could get the most out of his players that were coming in. They didn't want to give him that chance, and they didn't. And so now the question is, how long will they continue to give Olaf this chance now that he's starting to get up into that era of the number of winless games that Bradley Carnell had last year at this time? That kind of does it for most of the preview looking at SKC, but I do want to get lineups and a quick score prediction from myself before going into this game. Lineup prediction, I'm kind of tired of projecting Olaf lineups. It's somewhat depressing. So I'm going to look optimistically. I'm going to look for a vibes kind of lineup and how we should line up with who has been training and available. And I'm going to go glass half full on whether some of these guys can actually go at least 45. Because if you have a guy like Henry Kessler and he's good for at least 45, you put him in for at least 45. You don't say, I'm going to put him in as a sub if he's good to go for 45 and if the time frame in the game warrants it. No, I want to see Henry Kessler if he's good to go 45. So this lineup reflects that kind of a philosophy. It reflects a philosophy of if a player can go till at least half, they're in the game, the quality. So Roman Berkey is back in net for me. My back line, I've got Kyle Hebert, Henry Kessler, and Timo Baumgartel. I don't think Joachim Nilsson is ready yet. I don't know, but he's the one player based on his injury history that I am not going to be vibing with. So Kyle Hebert, Henry Kessler, Timo Baumgartel is my back line. I've got Giannis Horn as my left wing back. My midfield is Marcel Hartl and Tomas Ostrak. My right wing back is Conrad Wallem, and that could move up into a right midfield type position. And then my forwards are Salio, Klaus, and Cedric Teuchert. I want to see more Salio. I don't know why we haven't been seeing more Salio other than fixture congestion, saving him for an Open Cup type vibe. But it's a midweek match. We rested him for a large portion of the weekend. Run him out there. Get that speed on the left-hand side with Giannis Horn. Make the connections. You got Conrad Wallem, who can play in a more attacking role on the other side. This lineup, Berkey, Hebert, Kessler, Baumgartel, Horn, Hartl, Ostrak, Wallem, Salio, Klaus, and Teuchert. I like it. There are questions of if some of these players are 45 minutes fit, but I like the positioning in a lot of these players, and I think this is our best look against SKC. And I do think we win this game against SKC. I don't care who the head coach is. It can be Vali, it could be Olaf, it could be Lutz coming down and just cleaning house and coaching himself. I think these players know what's at stake against SKC. They've talked this week. Marcel Harrell has talked about wanting to give the fans what they need and deserve against this rivalry game in this Darbecue. Now, he didn't say Darbecue, but I think they understand. They know the assignment. It's a midweek match, so we'll see what kind of a group SKC brings in. Vegas likes us. We're at a plus 105. The draw is at plus 275, and SKC has a plus 250. So STL's favored as both teams are kind of struggling, and St. Louis is the home team. I think there's a lot of excitement that you can build around for this club, and I expect a lot from this club. I expect a win, and I don't see any other option. That's it for me on Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker. Thank you so much for joining me for this preview of SKC. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Enjoy the game on Wednesday night, and here's to a win on the other side. Bye, everybody.